The French created a revolutionary armored vehicle with 8 wheels, of which 4 were steel, and hid themselves while driving on asphalt. It survived 2 births, had 2 drivers, and a revolutionary turret, and the most famous episode of its service happened not on the battlefield. Why? We will tell you about this at the very end of this incredible story. But for now, let's figure out how French engineers even came up with such madness. The story begins in the year 1938, when Europe was rapidly rolling toward a new Great War. The French military command realized an unpleasant truth. Their armored technology was hopelessly outdated. Light reconnaissance vehicles could not penetrate enemy armor. Heavy tanks were too slow, and between them gaped a huge hole. A universal soldier was needed, capable of quickly scouting enemy positions, engaging in battle with their light technology, and at the same time not getting stuck in the mud somewhere in North Africa. The French General Staff announced a competition for the creation of a powerful armored car. The requirements sounded simple: high speed, good armor, serious weaponry, and the ability to drive on any terrain. As usual, the devil was in the details. The Panhard Company took on the project under the leadership of engineer Louis Delagarde, and what he invented looked so strange that many military officials initially thought it was a joke. Delagarde proposed an 8x8 scheme, not 4 wheels, not 6, but all 8. Moreover, 4 ordinary rubber wheels were located at the front and back, and between them were 4 more metal wheels with grousers. The logic was as follows. On asphalt, the machine drives only on the rubber wheels, like an ordinary car, developing a speed of up to 80 kilometers per hour. And when it is necessary to climb into mud or sand, the metal wheels are lowered and turn the armored vehicle into an all-terrain vehicle with a pressure on the ground of just 0.7 kilograms per square centimeter. But this was only the first oddity. Delagarde made the hull completely symmetrical at the front and rear. Why? And here begins the most interesting part. He seated 2 drivers back to back. One controlled forward movement, the second backward. The machine could accelerate to 80 kilometers per hour in any direction without turning around. You get under fire, and instead of slowly turning around, exposing your side to fire, you simply hit the gas and take the car away and reverse at the same speed with which you arrived. The hull turned out low and squat, only 1 meter and 80 centimeters in height. The frontal armor reached 60 millimeters, which by the standards of 1939 was very solid for a reconnaissance vehicle. Most anti-tank guns of that time simply would not have penetrated such protection from a distance. But then the French surpassed themselves. On the roof of the hull, they placed a revolutionary oscillating turret. This was the first design of this type in the world. The turret consisted of 2-cylinder halves, inserted one into the other. The lower cylinder was tilted, and its raised edges held the trunnions of the upper half. When the turret turned, both halves rotated simultaneously, and when it was necessary to aim the gun vertically, the upper half simply rocked relative to the lower one. No complex mechanisms, no extra parts. Ingeniously simple and simply ingenious. In this tiny turret sat the commander, who was also the gunner and the loader in one person. The armament consisted of a 25mm SA-35 cannon and a machine gun of 7.5mm caliber. For 1939, this was quite decent equipment, capable of dealing with the majority of enemy light tanks. The engine produced only 85 horsepower, but thanks to the low weight, About 9 tons, the machine accelerated to 80 kilometers per hour. The cruising range was 400 kilometers, which allowed for deep raids into the enemy rear. And here, the French faced a problem that no one foresaw. The prototype was built in the autumn of 1939. The tests went brilliantly. The machine showed excellent cross-country ability and developed the promised speed. The armor held up against hits. The military was delighted. On the 1st of May, 1940, even before the completion of all tests, the Ministry of Defense placed an order for 600 machines under the designation AM-40P. Production was planned to be completed by July, and the first 100 were expected as early as the second half of 1941. But history decided otherwise. On the 10th of May, 1940, the German invasion of France began. The Blitzkrieg crashed down on French positions with monstrous force. In 6 weeks, the French army lost about 1,749 tanks out of 3,000. The country capitulated on June 22nd, and all the grandiose plans for the production of new technology collapsed overnight. By the moment of capitulation, not a single serial machine had been produced, only one prototype. And here the French made a desperate decision, so that the unique development would not fall to the opponents. The single example of the AM-40P was urgently sent to North Africa, to Morocco. The machine was loaded onto a ship and taken out of occupied France at the last moment. And what happened next, no one knows. The prototype arrived in Morocco in the summer of 1940 and vanished without a trace. According to one version, it was hidden in the desert, buried in the sand to hide it from the collaborationists of the Vichy government. According to another, the machine was disassembled into parts and distributed to different warehouses. There is even a version that the prototype was eventually found and destroyed. One thing is known for sure. This machine has not survived to our days, and its exact location in the period from 1940 to 1945 remains a mystery. The Panhard factories in the Paris region were occupied by the Germans after the armistice on June 22, 1940. All work on the project ceased. Most of the design documentation was destroyed so that it would not fall into the hands of the occupiers. It seemed that Delagarde's insane idea had died along with the Third Republic. Panhard engineers were forced to work for the German war machine, producing trucks and spare parts. No one remembered the revolutionary armored car with 8 wheels. Europe was burning in the fire of war. France was occupied, and somewhere in the sands of Morocco lay the only prototype of a machine that could have changed the course of combat operations. Meanwhile, the war took its course. French colonial troops in North Africa first obeyed the Vichy government, then switched to the side of the Allies after Operation Torch in November 1942. The Americans and British landed in Morocco and Algeria, drove the Axis forces out of there, and began the offensive on Tunisia. And the prototype AM-40P continued to lie somewhere, forgotten by everyone. Years passed. France was liberated in August 1944. Paris rejoiced. De Gaulle triumphantly walked down the Champs-Élysées. The country began to recover after the occupation, but the army was in a catastrophic state. Armored vehicles were either destroyed or hopelessly outdated. It was necessary to urgently create new machines. And then, someone from the Panhard engineers remembered the project of 1939. Almost no documentation remained. The prototype was gone, but the idea was so good that the French decided to revive the project from scratch. And here began a completely new chapter in the history of this insane machine, which would eventually serve France for almost 4 decades and become one of the most recognizable symbols of French armor. The war ended, but France lay in ruins. The colonial empire was bursting at the seams, and without modern weaponry, it was impossible to hold Indochina and North Africa. In September 1949, the French War Ministry announced a new competition for a reconnaissance armored vehicle. The requirements were the same as in 1938, but now the bar had been raised. Panhard submitted its project based on the pre-war Model 201. In December 1949, the military chose the winner. It was Panhard with its insane 8-wheeled construction. The project received the designation Panhard 212, and later it was renamed EBR, which stood for Engin Blindé de Reconnaissance, Reconnaissance Armored Machine. But this was not at all the prototype that disappeared in Morocco. Almost no documentation remained, so the engineers had to create the machine anew. And then it turned out that in 10 years the world had changed beyond recognition. During the war, the calibers of tank guns grew by 1.5 to 2 times. The 25mm gun of the pre-war prototype now looked like a child's toy. The French made a radical decision. The new machine would receive a 75mm SA-49 cannon, the same one that stood on the American Sherman M4 tanks. This was a powerful gun with a muzzle velocity of 600 meters per second, capable of penetrating 70 millimeters of armor at a distance of 1,000 meters. But how to stuff such a hulk into the low hull of a reconnaissance vehicle? The answer was in the oscillating turret. The FL-11 turret was designed specifically for the 75mm gun. It consisted of 2 halves, but was now larger, stronger, and accommodated 2 people, the commander and the gunner. The cannon was rigidly attached to the upper half of the turret, which rocked up and down for vertical aiming. The crew increased from 2 to 4 people. 2 drivers sat in the nose and the stern of the hull back to back. The commander and gunner were located in the turret. Each driver had his own full set of controls and could drive the machine at full speed in his direction. What do you think happened when the system was tested in practice? It turned out that the idea is brilliant. The machine could indeed instantly escape from fire in reverse, developing the same speed as forward. No turning around, no loss of time. Saw the enemy, fired, and immediately dashed back at full speed. For the crew, this meant a sharp increase in the chances of survival. The hull was made low. The height was only 1 meter and 3 centimeters without the turret. With the turret, the total height reached 2 meters and 32 centimeters. The low silhouette made the EBR a difficult target, especially in desert terrain. The armor on the front of the hull and turret was 40 millimeters, sides 20 millimeters. Why did the French sacrifice armor? To preserve high speed and cross-country ability, the machine had to be lightened. The system with 8 wheels was kept but improved. The 4 outer wheels received Michelin tires of a special design. Inside, the tires were Vail-Picard tubes filled with nitrogen under pressure and divided into multiple cells. If a bullet pierced the tire, only one cell lost pressure. The rest continued to hold the shape. The wheel did not deflate, and the machine could continue moving. The 4 central wheels were metallic, with aluminum rims and steel grousers. On the highway, these wheels were raised by a hydraulic system, and the machine drove only on the 4 rubber ones, developing a speed of up to 100 kilometers per hour. Off-road, the metal wheels were lowered. The pressure on the ground fell to 0.7 kilograms per square centimeter. And now, the most interesting part about the engine. Panhard engineers created a unique motor specifically for the EBR. It was a 12-cylinder opposed piston boxer engine with air cooling and a power of 200 horsepower. The whole secret lay in its thickness, only 22 centimeters. The engine was flat as a pancake, yet delivering 200 horsepower. This motor was placed under the floor of the fighting compartment, right under the turret. On one hand, this was a genius move. The engine did not take up space in the hull. On the other hand, the French created a headache for themselves for a decade ahead. Guess what needed to be done for a serious repair of the engine? Correct. Remove the turret completely with all weaponry, instruments, and ammunition. This turned any major overhaul into a multi-day epic. In field conditions, it was practically impossible to repair the engine. The machine had to be evacuated to the base, which in the conditions of colonial wars somewhere in the depths of the Sahara became a serious problem. But there were also pluses. The engine ran on low-octane gasoline, which is critically important for an army fighting 1,000 kilometers from home. 2 Zenith carburetors ensured reliable operation in any climatic conditions, from the 50-degree heat of the Sahara to the colds of the European winter. The cruising range reached 650 kilometers. The transmission received a reversible gearbox, allowing the full power of the engine to be transmitted to any pair of drive wheels regardless of the direction of movement. All 8 wheels were driven constantly. The machine overcame a trench 2 meters wide, a ford 1 meter and 30 centimeters deep, and a vertical obstacle 40 centimeters high. The first prototype, Panhard 212, was tested in 1950. The military was satisfied. On July 14, 1950, during the parade on the Champs-Élysées, the new armored car was shown to the public for the first time. This was the second birth of the machine 10 years after its ancestor disappeared in the sands of Morocco. In 1951, serial production began. The model received the designation EBR-75, Model of the year 1951. From 1951 to 1954, 836 machines were built. They entered into service with light mechanized divisions and reconnaissance units of the French Army. But the French did not stop there. Already in the process of production, it became clear that the 75mm SA-49 cannon with manual loading was not enough. The military wanted more fire and a higher rate of fire, and they got it in the next modification, which would become even crazier than the first. In 1953, the French military received a new toy, the AMX-13 light tank with the revolutionary FL-10 turret. This turret had an autoloader consisting of 2 drums with 6 shells in each, and allowed fire to be conducted at a furious speed. The military looked at the AMX-13, then at the EBR, and asked, "Why can't we put this turret on an armored car?" Panhard engineers answered that technically it was possible. The FL-10 turret and the FL-11 turret from the EBR had the same ring diameter of 2 meters and 10 centimeters. The problem lay in the weight. The FL-10 turret weighed significantly more. It was required to reinforce the suspension, otherwise the machine would simply fall apart at the first bump. Work began in 1954. The chassis was reinforced. Torsion bars were replaced with more powerful ones. The weight of the machine grew from 13 to 15.5 tons. The new modification received the designation EBR-75, Model 1954. And now, let's figure out how this insane oscillating turret with an autoloader actually worked. The turret consisted of two parts, upper and lower, connected by trunnions. The lower part was attached to the hull and rotated 360 degrees. The upper part rocked up and down, providing vertical aiming of the gun. The trick was that the cannon was rigidly attached to the upper part of the turret. When it was necessary to raise the barrel, the entire upper half of the turret rose together with the weapon. This allowed for the installation of an autoloader, which worked only at a strictly defined position of the breech. In the rear part of the turret, in a huge niche, 2 drum magazines with 6 shots in each were located. The drums were positioned to the left and right of the gun axis. Guess how much time the reload took between shots? Just 5 seconds. The ramming mechanism automatically extracted the shell from the drum and fed it into the breech. The shutter closed and the cannon was ready to fire. Spent casings were automatically ejected outside through a special hatch. The crew did not need to do anything, just aim and shoot. 12 shells in the drums allowed for continuous fire for more than a minute. For a reconnaissance vehicle, this was more than enough. It swooped in, fired off 12 shells, and vanished at maximum speed. But what happened when the drums emptied? Here, the problems began. To reload the drums, the machine commander had to manually pull shells from the racks in the hull and shove them into the slots of the drums. Loading 12 shells in a cramped, oscillating turret took a minimum of 5 minutes, but usually much longer. That is precisely why French tactics prescribed using the EBR for sudden strikes and not for prolonged battles. The SA-50 gun was significantly more powerful than its predecessor. The barrel length was 57 calibers versus 34 on the SA-49. The muzzle velocity of the shell grew from 600 to 1,000 meters per second. Armor penetration almost doubled. At a distance of 1,000 meters, the shell penetrated 100 millimeters of armor, which allowed for the destruction of medium tanks like the Soviet T-54. A muzzle brake reduced recoil, allowing the light chassis to withstand firing from a powerful gun. The speed of horizontal aiming reached 30 degrees per second. The total ammunition load was 36 shots, 12 in the drums of the autoloader and 24 in the hull racks. And here begins the most interesting part about the steel wheels. Many still do not understand why the French invented this system with lifting metal wheels. The logic was simple, but ingenious. On asphalt, rubber tires provide excellent grip, low noise levels, and high speed. The machine rushes at 100 kilometers per hour almost silently, which is critically important for reconnaissance. But in sand or mud, rubber wheels begin to sink. 4 wheels cannot cope, and the machine gets stuck. The solution: add another 4 wheels, but metal ones, with developed grousers. When the machine moves off the asphalt, the driver presses a button. The hydraulic system lowers the metal wheels, and the pressure on the ground falls by almost 3 times. The metal wheels were smaller than the rubber ones. They had aluminum rims with welded steel grousers. Each metal wheel weighed only 80 kilograms versus 250 for the rubber one. The weight saving was 680 kilograms. How much time do you think it took to raise or lower the metal wheels? About 15 seconds. The driver pressed a button, hydraulic cylinders were activated, and the wheels smoothly lowered or raised. It was possible to do this while moving, although usually the machine was stopped. When the metal wheels are lowered, the machine turned into a real all-terrain vehicle. It drove through sand where any ordinary cars would have gotten bogged down, overcame swamps, forded rivers up to a depth of 1 meter and 30 centimeters. The pressure on the ground in the 8x8 mode was 0.7 kilograms per square centimeter, less than that of a human foot. But there was also a flip side to the coin. On metal wheels, the speed dropped to 60 or 70 kilometers per hour. The noise increased many times over. The grousers pounded the earth, creating a wild racket. Stealth could be forgotten. The machine could be heard for a kilometer. Fuel consumption increased by 1.5 times. Therefore, the tactical application was as follows. On the march along roads, drive in 4x4 mode. Fast, quiet, economical. Upon approaching off-road terrain, switch to 8x8 mode, sacrificing speed for the sake of cross-country ability. After completing the task, return to the road, raise the metal wheels, and race again at maximum speed. Steering worked only on the 4 rubber wheels, front and rear. The metal wheels did not turn. This simplified the design but limited maneuverability off-road. The turning radius was only 6 meters, which for a machine 6 meters and 15 centimeters long was an excellent indicator. The suspension of all 8 wheels was independent on torsion bars. This ensured a smooth ride even on rough terrain. The machine could overcome trenches 2 meters wide, vertical obstacles 40 centimeters high, and climb slopes with a steepness of up to 60%. From 1954 to 1956, 279 machines of the Model 54 were built. They went to elite reconnaissance units and proved themselves excellently in battles. The rate of fire increased threefold compared to the first model. Armor penetration doubled, cross-country ability remained at the same high level, but the French did not stop there either, because in the 60s tanks appeared against which the 75mm gun no longer worked, and even more powerful weaponry was required, which would turn the EBR into a real tank killer. In the early 60s, the world of tanks changed again. The Soviet T-62, American M60 Patton, and British Centurion appeared with armor that the 75mm gun could no longer penetrate. The French army faced a choice: either write off the EBR or modernize it for the new realities. The military chose the second option. In 1963, the rearmament program began. Guess what they decided to do with the 836 machines of the Model 51 with the obsolete 75mm gun. They did not write them off. The barrel of the 75mm CA-49 cannon was bored out to a caliber of 90mm, and a muzzle brake was installed. The result was the CN-90F2 low-pressure gun, specially developed for firing cumulative heat shells. From 1964 to 1968, 650 machines underwent modernization and received the designation EBR-90. The 90mm CN-90F2 gun had a muzzle velocity of only 750 meters per second, which was less than that of the old SA-50. But the trick lay in the use of cumulative ammunition, which penetrated armor not with kinetic energy, but with a directed explosion. The cumulative shell penetrated 320 millimeters of armor at any distance, which allowed for the destruction of practically any tank of that time, including the Soviet T-54 and T-55. The remaining machines with obsolete 75mm guns were written off from combat units. Some were turned into command staff vehicles by removing the guns and installing radios and tables for maps. French tankers nicknamed them grasshoppers for their ability to quickly jump around the battlefield, transmitting orders. And where did these machines fight anyway? The main battlefield for the EBR became Algeria. From 1954 to 1962, a war for independence was fought there. The French army used the EBR for patrolling roads, guarding convoys, and raids on rebel bases. The speed and powerful weaponry made the machine ideal for such tasks. The Légion étrangère, the Foreign Legion, actively used the EBR in Algeria and the Sahara. The 1st Foreign Cavalry Regiment received these machines among the first. Legionnaires wore light khaki berets and were proud of their 8-wheeled monsters. The machines proved their value in the desert, where their cross-country ability and range were critically important. In battles, it turned out that the bidirectional driving system worked brilliantly. Crews learned to use the tactic: raid, shoot, retreat backwards. The machine popped out of cover, fired 12 shells from the autoloader, and instantly left in reverse at full speed without turning around. For the enemy, this looked like lightning. It was impossible to predict where the machine would appear from and where it would vanish. The metal wheels in the desert showed themselves to be excellent. The sand of the Sahara could stop any ordinary car, but the EBR on 8 wheels passed everywhere. True, the noise was hellish. Legionnaires joked that the enemy hears the EBR before he sees it, but getting bogged down was practically impossible. But there were problems too. The engine under the turret remained a headache for mechanics. In desert conditions, where sand got into everything, any serious breakdown meant evacuating the machine to the base. To remove the turret in field conditions was unrealistic. Crews tried to perform maximally thorough maintenance to avoid a major overhaul in battle. The heat of the Sahara, up to 50 degrees, tested the technology for durability. The air coolant of the engine coped, but the crew inside cooked. The turret turned into an oven, especially after firing, when additional heat emanated from the cannon. One had to drink liters. The Portuguese army bought 78 machines of the Model 54 with the FL-10 turret. The Portuguese fought in their African colonies in Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau from 1961 to 1975. The 1st Cavalry Group received the nickname Dragons. Their EBRs patrolled jungles and savannas, fighting partisans. In the jungles, the metal wheels turned out to be less useful than in the desert. Wet soil and dense vegetation limited cross-country ability. But on roads and in the savanna, the machines showed themselves magnificently. The autoloader gave a huge advantage in fleeting clashes with rebels. The Portuguese also used a special version, EBR-VTT, an armored personnel carrier based on the EBR. 28 such machines were built specifically for Portugal. Instead of a turret, an open superstructure with a 12.7mm machine gun was installed, and inside, a landing party of 12 fighters was accommodated. These machines accompanied combat EBRs, providing infantry support. A certain number of EBRs were received by Morocco, Tunisia, Mauritania, and even West Germany and Indonesia. In total, during the years of production, from 1950 to 1960, about 1,200 machines of all modifications were built. This was a serious success for the French defense industry. In the French Army, EBRs served until 1987. 36 years of service for an armored car is an outstanding term. The machine was replaced by the more modern AMX-10RC with a 6x6 wheel formula and a 105mm cannon. But the EBR remained in memory as one of the most successful and unusual reconnaissance machines in history. And now the time has come to tell about the most famous episode of the EBR's service, which happened not on the battlefield, but at a funeral, and which we promised at the very beginning of this story. On November 9, 1970, Charles de Gaulle died in his residence La Boisserie from a ruptured aneurysm. The greatest leader of France of the 20th century departed quietly, without witnesses. The world mourned. 80 heads of state arrived in Paris, but de Gaulle had written his will back in the year 1952. He wanted a simple funeral in the village of Colombey. No presidents, ministers, deputies, only family and the military without music and orchestras. And here the question arose, on what to carry the coffin from the residence to the church? A modest but dignified machine was needed. Someone remembered the Panhard EBR, a machine that personified French military genius. But the turret was removed. One cannot carry the coffin of a general on a combat machine with a cannon. On November 12th, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the coffin, covered with the tricolor, was placed on the platform of the EBR. The machine slowly moved off. Along the road stood thousands of people. When the procession passed, people wept, saluted, raised 2 fingers in the sign of victory. The bell tolled a funeral knell. Why exactly the EBR? This machine embodied everything that de Gaulle valued: non-standard thinking, unique construction, tenacity, 2 births, 40 years of service, efficiency in colonial wars that de Gaulle ended. Modesty. Without the turret, it looked simple, but those in the know understood that this was a legend. At the church, the coffin was taken down. 12 young residents of Colombey carried it inside. The mass was short and simple. De Gaulle was buried next to his daughter Anne. On the white marble, a simple inscription: Charles de Gaulle, 1890-1970. The EBR fulfilled its last mission. The machine that was born twice, fought in Algeria and Angola, became the last transport of the greatest Frenchman. It was an honor of which few were worthy. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel, hit like. In the next episodes, we will tell about other insane projects of military technology. Until we meet again.